Well, welcome everyone to TRINICY's Roundtable on Socialism. So excited that we are doing this talk. It is a much needed discussion in our world today, regardless of the generation that you are in. We are seeing an uprise of socialism on campuses in our general society. And I am so excited to have these three lovely faces before us today, joining me to talk about socialism in our world and from a Christian's perspective. So I'm going to go around and introduce each individual and have them speak a little bit about themselves, and then we'll get started. So I'm going to jump over to Garrett. Garrett, where are you coming to us from? What is your favorite food? And give us a general idea of your background, if possible.
Sure. So I'm Garrett Smith. I am from the wonderful state of North Carolina in the western part near the mountains. And, I don't really think I have a favorite food. I just like to eat. So,
Okay, fair enough.
but I graduated from Western Carolina University a few years ago, and I am currently a foster care worker.
Wow, that is awesome. Thank you for doing what you do. That is
Thank
really,
you.
really
Thank you.
cool.
Okay, so Monica Evans here, and I am originally from Lima, Peru. I currently live in the state of Arizona. My favorite food, I need to say Peruvian food. However, I like food in general. Peruvian food is super good. So if you haven't tried, try it. Besides that, as far as the school, currently I'm not in a school. However, I have two teenagers and they are in a school. Therefore, I will say that I'm a high schooler and what is the name for the last year of a school? So I'm starting in a school and the end of a school, because my children are one is starting high school and the other one is about to finish high school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are getting all the talk, all the chatter of teenagers. I know how that goes. Good on you. So you're a stay-at-home mom, I take it?
No, I actually work for a financial institution. I am an auditor.
Oh,
And in the
wow.
community, I do work with different nonprofit organizations. Many of them are supporting Native American communities or faith-based organization with either a student ministry or organizations that assist women with the different challenges that they may face.
Okay, wow. Wow, thank you for doing all your work that you do. It's really great to hear people are active in their community. That's essential, especially in our day and age. Right on. So Ruxandra, favorite food, where you're from, what is your background?
Hi, so I'm originally from Romania, from the northeast region of Romania, very close to Ukraine. I live in Copenhagen, Denmark, and I'm here with my husband, who grew up here. And I'm a geoscientist and work as an environmental analyst. That's my technical background. My favorite food has to be a Romanian food. I think we have this dish that is called sarma. It's basically cabbage rolls with minced meat, rice, and vegetables inside with cornmeal. It's a very simple dish, but I absolutely love it, and I eat it quite often when I go there.
That sounds amazing. So I'm coming to you from Canada. So I love that we have this variety, people with so many different backgrounds. I love that because we get to have a really diverse talk that way, because we're all in different spheres of influence, even in different countries. So that's fantastic. And we actually have here in Saskatchewan, where I'm located, we have a similar dish because we have such a large populace of Mennonite. Our Mennonite community is very large, so we have a similar dish that is essentially cabbage rolls and of the similar consistency. So that's fantastic. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Now that we know a little bit more of who everybody is joining us, I'm going to jump into our first question, and that is, how would you individually describe socialism? So let's start with Garrett. Garrett, how would you describe socialism?
Sure. So, there are different types of socialism. You've got what people would call regular socialism, which to me, that's just the government owns the means of production. The government controls everything. It controls what you can produce. It controls how you can produce it. And then you've got democratic socialism, which is very similar. And we see, in the United States, figureheads such as Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont, proposing ideas such as that. And then you've got, on the more extreme side, you've got communism, which, as we know, is quite possibly the most extreme form, the most extreme far left form of socialism. Famous historical figureheads, Joseph Stalin, Vladimir Lenin, Fidel Castro. And then on another extreme, you've got National Socialism, which, of course, has been, for the most part, universally condemned from the final days of World War II. But National Socialism, as we know, fascism, sometimes a more appropriate name for it, Benito Mussolini, Adolf Hitler. But an interesting note is that all of your major fascists like that were actually former Marxists at one point. So yeah, that's just a brief run through of the different types, if you would.
That's awesome. That's that's a really thorough explanation. I really appreciate that, Garrett. How about you, Ruxandra? How would you describe socialism?
I think I really recommend to everybody to look it up in the dictionary, because it's very important to have the actual definition, the unanimous definition that's already accepted. And I think Garrett explained it brilliantly, because it is about the government owning all the means of production and all the goods and having monopoly over all economic activities. However, from my perspective as a Romanian, it also has a personal turn, because Romania was under communism for more than 40 years. And we transitioned to democracy in the early 90s. But I know that communism affected my country not only during the regime, but also after the regime. And now I know that my country, even 30 years after communism, is still recovering and is still post-communist. But I think the most important thing to know about socialism is that the hypothesis of this theory is that history is written by a continuous conflict between classes, like the worker class and the bourgeoisie. And communism, as Garrett said, is the extreme form. Communism is actually the end goal of socialism. And when communism is going to be installed on Earth, it's quite apocalyptic, the definition the theorists gave to communism. But that would be the end of history. So when communism is going to be installed, there's not going to be any class conflict, so the history is going to end. And it's going to be some sort of heaven on earth idea, utopia, basically. And I would like to come back to talk a little bit about the history, because it's very important to know why it is so appealing. Why did it spread so widely and so quickly over such a big geographic surface like the Soviet Union? It's quite an amazing phenomenon to study.
Yeah, I totally agree. We will come back to that, and because it is essential to understand the roots. If you want to understand where we're going as a society, thankfully we do have history, and we know how we can combat different societal ills such as socialism. All right, Monica, you're up next.
Okay, so as far as what is socialism? Well, in simple terms, what I understand socialism to be is this idea that there is someone that is in control, and then they go ahead and give the things that we maybe as a society have and then distribute to everyone. It sounds to be nice, but I don't think it's necessarily the idea in itself may sound nice, but when it comes to practice, I don't think the practical ways are actually as nice as they sound. So I think we need to be very careful about that. And even when we go ahead and look now terminology on the dictionary, nowadays there are so many things that are being restated, or they want to put like nicer ways to make things look. So it's very important to check a history, like it was mentioned before, to know exactly how it actually has played out in real life situations. And if we were to look back, I don't think right now there is 100% socialist country, or as far as what I was reading. So anyways, so to me, it's once again this idea like someone is in control and they go ahead and give everything to everyone, kind of, so they have everybody has the same at the end. Once again, sounds really nice, but if we talk about the practice of it, I don't think it would be really, really nice.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's one centralized unit of elites, which is generally the government, which redistributes everything that the hardworking class gathers in to the rest of society. And there's very little room, if any, left for personal responsibility and or incentive to grow and develop, which is essentially is what socialism wants to quash. So it's something, it's interesting. I remember when I was really little, watching Robin Hood and hearing him saying, steal from the rich and give to the poor. And immediately I went, oh, there's something off with that. But as a child, of course, you just go along with the talk. But it's been an interesting progression I've seen. And that was the first instance, even looking back for a while now, on how we've been conditioned as a society and even as a general populace of the world, how we've been conditioned to take on some of these very socialistic talking points. So from your perspectives and with your varied backgrounds, what would be some of the most concerning things about socialism that you have seen in the past, and maybe even some things that you're seeing creep into our present and that could lead into our future? So who would like to go first on that one? Anyone?
I think I can go first. Taking into consideration that I'm not very well versed, or it's not like I am an expert on this subject. However, I think one of the concerns is currently, you know, there is opportunities for ideas. Like if I am a person that has like good ideas, I can go ahead and explore that, and I can go ahead and create a product, or why not? And then based on my abilities or how clever maybe I am, or the group of people that I work with, I can create something, and then the earnings can be for me and the group, and we work really hard for that, right? However, if we have someone in control, then whatever I create, like, and I have earnings, then everything will be given to everybody else. So at the end, my hard work may not be like, I may not see the fruits of it necessarily for me and my family. And so there is something that may be quenched or put down in that sense. So I think that to be a problem. With this idea, like, let's go ahead and give everybody for what they need, but then not everybody will need to work for that. And or if I have an idea, I may not be like, maybe even willing to go ahead and go and explore that, because once again, it's going to be given to everybody else. So.
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I think I have, Monica has a great point, because you become just a slave of the state. You as an individual do not count in socialism. It's all about the collective, because everything is even, everything's leveled up. And when you have this homogenous mass of people, you don't have any individuals that can stand out. But I think one of the main things to consider in terms of socialism is that thinking that socialism works right now on this earth just reveals a very faulty understanding of human nature. Because what it does is it creates a monstrosity. You put all the power in the hands of the state, and you expect the state to be completely free of corruption and free of, I don't know, all the faulty aspects of the human nature, free of evil. And just the fact that you have everything centralized in the hands of the state, and then you have no contribution whatsoever yourself as an individual, you have no checks and balances. And obviously corruption is a reality, and it will infiltrate at some point. It can create this false sense of security for a while, for several years, maybe a couple of decades, but then it's just gonna crash, and probably gonna talk about the economic aspect of it. But just that you give away all the power you have as an individual in the hands of an abstract institution that you have no control of, it's very dangerous, and it should raise a lot of alarms to everybody who's considering socialism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about you, Garrett? What do you see are some of the concerning aspects of socialism, both from the past and in the present?
What scares me the most in terms of taking the present and comparing it to the past. See, I'm a historian. I love reading history books, historical speeches. And what really gets me is the number of people today who fall for it, and they don't actually know their history, or they would know that it has not worked one single time. I mean, every single time a great nation has fallen to, whether it's communism, National Socialism, it doesn't matter. It has always crashed and burned. So that's what scares me, is the fact that there are so many people today who are willing to accept something. I mean, it's like they're totally oblivious to the fact that it has crashed and burned every single time.
Yeah. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of talk, especially in the United States, and it's creeping in here into Canada as well. And I've seen it in Europe and heard from different people globally, even
Mm-hmm.
this desire from a minority group, because truly it is a minority, who desires to tear down systems and structures which have been built up to provide economic success for the general populace. And we want to tear down these systems because they're oppressionary, and that right in and of itself is very socialistic, because they do not want a diverse range of power given to the people. They want it all centralized, which is both failed in the past, and we know if it was implemented here today in our present, we know that it would also fail. So great responses. I absolutely love that. And speaking of some of the negatives of socialism, what do you think of young people on campus today who are being fed and indoctrinated, really, with this socialistic mentality? What do you think is so appealing about socialism to them?
I think for what I was reading, some of the things that appeals is like this idea of free education, free healthcare, free fill the blank. And once again, it sounds nice, right? But if we were to think where those things come from, someone needs to be working for them. Now, it will be nice for, especially in the United States, I think education is extremely, extremely expensive. And many people want to go ahead and nowadays achieve high education, because there is this idea that if you go to college, then you will have more opportunities, which sometimes it can be true, but sometimes it may not. And so if you have this idea, like you go ahead and have to pay a lot of money to go to school versus free, then of course you're going to want to go with free, right? Like, I want free too, but let's go ahead and think, where is that coming from? Because nothing is free, except maybe the air that we breathe. By the grace of God, or our vision, we're able to see or hear. But the rest of things are like, they cost money, or they come from somewhere. So.
Yeah, I do agree with that, where people would desire that mentality, or have that mentality of, oh, well, if this is an option, of having a free education as an option, that's fantastic. But there's multiple layers behind having a free education, for example, like you brought up, that people never talk about. They never talk about the running of a facility that they need to go to in order to get instruction. They don't talk about wages or anything else that would be a layer of the production of education. They just put a label of free on it, and that, I do believe that is one area, Monica, I do agree, where young people especially, would be incentivized to think that way. So how about you, Garrett? What are you seeing? What do you feel?
Looking at this also, again, comparing history to today, I think this kind of relates to what Monica just said in terms of free. People think, we just pay more taxes, everything will be taken care of. But do you really want to be taxed 80%? I mean, how can you live off that? Once it was Winston Churchill who said, can a nation tax themselves into prosperity? At the same time, can a man stand in a bucket and lift himself up by the handle? So, it was in the mid 60s, really popular old radio show host Paul Harvey, one of my favorites. He gave a speech called Freedom to Chains. And in this, he said, any nation that has willingly taxed its people more than 25% has seen a decline. You know, they decay morally, socially, economically, simultaneously. And, you know, he also, in the same speech, just near the beginning, he says, you know, at Runnymede, the Magna Carta was handed to King John on the end of a sword, denying the federal government, or the royal government rather, the right to unlimited taxation. But yet, and I'm looking at this from an American perspective, it was us, the American people, to be the first in the world to willingly sacrifice our right to not get the life taxed out of us. And we did this through an innocent sounding constitutional amendment. I believe it was the 16th. You know, and it just, it's truly mind-boggling.
Yeah, I absolutely echo what you just said about that 80% mark of taxation here in Canada. I can speak for myself. About 60% of my income is taxed, and there's no incentive, because really I'm working for the government at this point. I'm a slave of the state, and most people don't see that anymore. I've noticed most people want to give more and more money to the government, and that's very concerning for me. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Garrett. How about you, Ruxandra, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, those are amazing points, but I think when a lot of young people, let's say they support the idea of socialism and they think that's the best option there is, unfortunately, and I don't say it from a mean spirit, it shows a lot of ignorance, because they don't understand the economic mechanisms behind it. They don't understand what that means in the long term. However, what I think it's more appealing than the economy of socialism, because that's kind of selling you an image of comfort and just welfare, is the social rhetoric. And that's maybe the main reason why the Bolshevik Revolution was so successful. We know that it was also by means of violence, and a lot of atrocities were committed. But the socialist rhetoric knew how to emphasize the real human struggles, like the poverty, exploitation by the state or the the bourgeoisie, the regime, or the Tsar in Russia, power abuse. And this rings a bell in almost everybody. And now, especially in the United States and Western Europe, which are very wealthy, the wealthiest states in the world, the wealthiest states in history. Just because you don't know, you're not that interested in history anymore, which is one of the greatest problems we face as humans today. And I'm sorry for the birds in the background, the windows are open. It's just that they don't know what happened yesterday. So they don't know exactly what Garrett said. All socialist systems, they failed.
Yeah.
Based on their own premises.
Right. And I think it's interesting. We see so many young people, and I know there's this huge socialist wave in America with Bernie Sanders, and they were like, oh my gosh, all this free stuff, he is our leader. But yet, so many young people today absolutely love their iPhones. They're enthralled with social media. And so I wanted to get a couple of things that you personally enjoy that have been a product of capitalism, because I find that often in conversations, whether I'm on my local campus or somewhere else, just having a general discussion with people, I often point to my phone. This little thing right here is a media device that is brilliantly made, and somebody had to come up with this invention. So what are one or two things that you would use in a conversation, let's say, to point people towards the positive production or result of capitalism that they presently use, everybody uses, that socialism would not give us the freedom or choice even to utilize?
Well, we're using one right now. You know, we got our phone, we're using our laptop. I've got a wonderful Chromebook right here that I'm looking right at. I mean, you know, in communist nations, I mean, you can forget that. And even if you did have it, the government would tell you what you could watch on it, what you could read. They take you to jail or the gulag if you were found operating outside of it. So yeah, just, you know, be glad that in a country like, you know, like the United States, you can go and stand in line at Starbucks and then go sit down and get on your Chromebook or your iPhone.
That's awesome. Anyone else?
I think we have a lot of liberties. and a lot of freedoms that we will see they will disappear as we move towards whatever ideology we decide to move as a country. And I think that is something to really take into consideration. And the other thing that I think we need to take into consideration, and I think I'm going in a rabbit trail, however, stay with me with the idea, like, I know some people take the teachings of Jesus, some as like mandates when they are not mandates. For example, this idea of like we sharing, right? Or even selling all we have and to share with others. That is not a mandate. That comes from a transformed heart, and it's not like he tells you, if you want to go ahead and be in with me, then you need to go ahead and sell everything you have. I think what he's pointing at there is like, if we take our things as more important than anything else, then there's an issue of the heart. That is one thing. The other thing, if we follow whatever human is going to be in charge, we're humans, we're fallible. So what makes us think like the government is going to be the solution for it all? Like, I don't think it's a solution for everything, because the issue of the heart remains. So
that's a great point, Monica. I love that. Yeah, we seemingly over the course of less than a century, we've turned politics and politicians into God. We look to them as our source of income and sense of security instead of the one unfailing, never-ending God who sees from the end from the beginning and knows the whole in between. And we've placed people on that pedestal and that level of where God should reside in our lives. I think it's a very good point, and especially with Christians, this new generation of Christians, and I know a few of us are in that generation even, where even over the pulpit, seemingly we're being told that Jesus was a socialist. It's the most bizarre ideology and has no place or roots within the gospel itself. And that does lead into a question. Should Christians be in favor? I know I gave my opinion right there. Should Christians be in favor of socialism? And where in the Bible have you found that people, whether Christians or people in society in general, point towards a root per se of Christian socialism?
I think I'm going to start by answering that communism is not a new idea. We always associate communism with Das Kapital, the book written by Karl Marx and Engels, and then we have Lenin, and then we have Stalin as a leader. But communism per se was an idea that was exploited ever since the early centuries of Christianity. And we have in Acts, in the book of Acts, we know that the early Christians, they sold all their possessions and they gave all the profit to the church, and everything was distributed. And we have many great thinkers, philosophers, and saints of the church who talked about communism, but not in the understanding that we have today of communism. We have Saint Ambrose of Milan, who was the mentor of Saint Augustine, and he considered that all things originate in nature and therefore our own use. And then we have even John Wycliffe, who was an English theologian and philosopher in the 14th century. He said that the first forms of human society were based on the principles of innocence and communism. And communism means things in common, that you share, you have all things in common. However, what happened in the early church was an act that came out of free will. People wanted to do that, and it wasn't applicable to the entire state or the entire Roman Empire. That's even impossible. You can't even think about it. That doesn't work. So it was just like small groups. They lived together. They lived as a family. They loved each other, and that was the key aspect of why it worked. And as a Christian, I think it's impossible to be Christian and think that socialism, in the understanding, in the Marxist understanding, is something that you can accept, because you have all the examples. To me, when I hear people in the West, in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, as I said before, talking about communism and thinking that that's the best idea, and saying, yeah, you know, it didn't work because they didn't implement the right kind of communism, or the right kind of socialism. That is a slap in the face of millions and millions of people who died, suffered, lost everything because communism was implemented, and you cannot implement communism by means of peace. You have to enforce that. And we have in the Jewish tradition as well, and also the New Testament, private property is not a sin. Private property is seen also in the Old Testament as an extension of the individual. It's something sacred. That's why it's a sin to covet your neighbor's possessions, your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's slaves, because that belongs to him. And that's a sacred thing. And we should understand that as Christians, because socialism means that you no longer have any right over anything. You lose private property in the end.
Wow, that was a fantastic answer. And we got into the history and we got into the Bible and all of that. Thank you so much. Wow, I'm gonna keep that snippet for myself. Anyone else want to chime in on what the Bible says about possibly socialism, in favor or not in favor? Anyone else want to chime in? All right, we're gonna move over to Garrett. Oh, if you can just unmute your mic there.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so you're going to have to forgive me because I cannot remember which specific verse it was in Scripture. However, I do remember a verse where I believe it was a young man came to Jesus, and he was complaining that this other guy had so many possessions and he wouldn't give them to him. And Jesus, in the nicest way that he could, said, "I don't care. That's not why I'm here." And so, like Ruxy said, it's not a sin to own property. And speaking about like what you were saying with, we now have progressive Christians getting up in the pulpit. That's a very dangerous path. As we know, sugar-coated preaching is dangerous to the soul. And I'm going to take I'm going to make a bold statement here. The Nazis did the same thing. They actually had what they called progressive Christianity, positive Christianity. If you read the Nazi Party platform, you'll see that they said the party as a whole represents a point of view of positive Christianity. Well, positive Christianity was their own take on it. Now, of course, not all of them believe. There were plenty of prominent atheists in the Nazi administration, of course, like, Heinrich Himmler, Joseph Goebbels. But the positive Christianity doctrine replaced Jesus with Hitler as the new Messiah. It replaced the cross with the swastika. It replaced the Bible with Mein Kampf. And so I would be cautious, taking the Bible and twisting it to fit your own agenda, because you're not following a historically good path and you're not following a Christian path in doing it.
Very well spoken. Yeah, I am a huge believer in looking back into our past, and even in the Bible it tells us to do personal reflection, and I believe that as a society we also need to look back and remember. And that's something that is seemingly being stripped away at the moment, is many people want, well, not many people, we're going to say many people in the terms of what the media would want us to believe, and that is that minority groups want to remove our history. They want to rewrite our history even. Because then when we look back and generations after us look at what happened, they're going to see a success of socialism, a success of Marxist and communist ideologies. And that's really dangerous. So I really appreciate you bringing up those two different aspects, both from you, Garrett, and Ruxy. So moving forward, how do you think socialism, getting a little bit more personal now, a little more local, how do you think socialism affects the family structure as opposed to capitalism? Anyone want to chime in on that one?
Okay, I'm going to start because I come from a former communist country. It's very interesting because my answer might surprise you, because what modern day socialists think of the family, it's basically everything is the liberal, let's say liberal philosophy, not necessarily liberal politics, which is also not liberal anymore in the classical sense of liberalism. In Romania, the family was seen as the cell of society. So the state put a lot of emphasis on the family, and it was, there was almost like a huge pressure on every individual to get married and have children, because children were necessary for the state to work. And to have like a good functioning socialism, you have to have a lot of people, you have to have a lot of workers, obviously proletarians, how they're called. So you might think that everything looked good, everything's in pink, because families respected, families were incentivized. You'd be paid even more. I think you would be paid 10% more in Romania if you get one child, and that would increase the more children you would have. However, there was a lot of pressure on women. Women were supposed to have a family, have children, go to work, and do all sorts of jobs. And if you want to see feminism, like what feminists want today, you should look at communist Romania, because they did all sorts of jobs, all sorts of masculine jobs, like hardcore physical work. However, what happened at some point, because people started to see that my children will become the slaves of the state. So that ended up in one of the most horrible demographic crisis in the world, because women wanted to do abortion. They wanted to abort their children because they were afraid, thinking about the future. There was such a heavy, dark pessimism about it that you would think that I don't want to say that I'm for that, obviously, but how they saw it is that, why should you torture a human being knowing that there's no future? So abortion was banned. It was illegal to do abortion, so they did it illegally. And we had the highest mortality rate for women in the world at some point in the late 60s. There was a decree in 68 that banned all contraception in Romania, and because of the pressures the state put on women, it just crashed, and you had this horrible, tragic episode in Romanian history. So the point is that when the state starts to get personally involved with the family life, it's never going to end up good. What I really believe is that states should always protect the core family, a husband and a wife and children, because that's how society works. That's what we know that worked in history. It always worked in history. We don't see the Amazons like founding an empire that lasted 1,500 years or something. It crashed immediately. So the Christian understanding of family is the only one that works. It's the only one that can produce healthy children and provide for a good future.
Yeah, it's very, very good. Yeah, it's interesting, because even the health and wealth of nations is analyzed and comes to a consensus of based upon the health and wealth of families. So the family structure is very, very important, and protecting it even more so. Anybody else want to jump in on how socialism versus capitalism can affect the family structure? Yes, no, maybe so?
No.
No? Okay. Well, I will give you one little tidbit. Because when the government, or there's a central power in place, everything, including children and their education and their values, all have to come in line with that of the state. So even children, humanity, is viewed in a socialistic, communistic society as that of possession of the state, which removes parental rights, which God instituted, and it diminishes the importance of parental control and that of instilling Christian values, because in a socialistic, communistic society, we know what happens to families, because children are the future. Children are our collective future. And when we are limited or persecuted even for trying to instill godly principles into our children, that's going to directly affect not only their future, but our collective future as well. So I just wanted to throw that tidbit of information in there. All right, we're going to wrap this whole thing up. Oh, go ahead, Monica.
Like, that is even happening nowadays, though, in some states, and the way that the government wants to be involved into like what they feed into our children in the school, yeah, especially with the whole sexual agenda. Like, it starts like at what age now? Like,
for majority in America, it's 5 years old.
Right? So 5 years old, and they need to know about all these things. Like a 5-year-old shouldn't be like being fed into. And or if you want us to go ahead and start, like, let's say sex education, as parents, we know what is best for our children. Like, what makes you think like the government knows what is best for my child? So we see like
Yeah.
glimpses of that idea, but imagine if it becomes like the norm. Like, what is that about?
Yeah, it's a very dangerous path to tread. I will say this too. It's very interesting that during the coronavirus crisis or pandemic, the World Health Organization became on the forefront. It was, the spotlight was shone on it. And something very interesting that the majority of people don't understand is that the World Health Organization sets the standard of sexuality education for the world's children. And many different governments, unions, even different teachers, populations rather, they look at the World Health Organization and different governing bodies as credible sources of how they should implement new education or curriculum to teach our children. And one element of their sexuality education was to teach 10 to 12-year-olds the difference between their values, their personal values at 10 and 12 compared to that of their parents. And when that happens, the children are affirmed in the child's values, not that of the parents. And that's a very dangerous thing because the children want to say the right thing and what the teacher is teaching them as opposed to what they're being taught at home. And when children are affirmed by the state or by unions or by teachers who do not have a solid basis of morality in which they can refer to, that child will lean more upon that teacher or the teaching of the state as opposed to that of the values of this family structure. And the reason why they do this, even with this sexual education, is because they want to teach the child to rely upon the state more and more. And because we see higher increases of, let's say, early teen pregnancy, which results in abortions or drives condom sales, multiple different factors, which drives a different industry, which is connected directly to a socialistic, communistic kind of style of thinking and belief. So it's very important that we understand, even with sexual education, it removes the rights of parents and families, as well as stripping away values. So a very great point, Monica. I really appreciate that. All right, we're going to wrap this whole thing up. I'd like to get your last final thoughts of socialism, what you're seeing, feeling, thinking. Where do you think we have gone wrong, maybe in society or even as Christians, and how we can step up? What are some kind of action items that we can give the audience today?
I think the most important thing is that we lost our memory as individuals. We do not care about history and we disconsider history completely because we have this progressive view of humanity and society.
Yeah.
We think that what happened yesterday doesn't really matter because today we're anyways at a much higher elevated position than before. So what happened even 10 years ago doesn't really matter. And this stems from the postmodernist, let's say, zeitgeist that has penetrated the academia, the schools, and the lack of emphasis on history and the importance of history. And it's like the Roman saying, history is the teacher of life. It's very true. Humanity hasn't changed. Human nature hasn't changed. And if we do not learn from history, we're going to repeat it. And we have great examples. I mean, communism, the Soviet Union just collapsed not even 30 years ago. So it's in our very close past, let's say.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. Like, even as I think we will tell, as a mom, you know, I tell my children, be sure that you don't go over the same mistakes that I did. And let me share with you my life and my mistakes. But it seems to be like in our human nature, we want to try to see how it goes. And so we try to make the same mistakes. And then afterwards, you're like, oh, yeah, I shouldn't have. So may it be that as a nation, we don't decide to try to see how it looks like, because what is going to happen when we look back is like, yes, we shouldn't have. That is one thing. The other thing is, let's check history to what I think we're all saying the same thing. So then you can see the pattern, because this is not like new information. It has happened in the past. And last but not least, I think as Christians, we're called to be good stewards of what the Lord is giving to us. So in your household, in your work, in whatever situation we are at, and it's always an issue of the heart. If we're expecting for government to come and tell us to share the things that we need to share, it's not going to work, because it comes from the heart. I count you all as my brothers and sisters in Christ. Therefore, like I will tell you, come to my house. And when you come to my house, the things that I have in my house are yours, but that's because we share the same Christ. And my heart is like for you, because I count you as my brother and my sister. But it's not because there is a law, or it's not that I'm doing for like to get brownie points or to complete check marks, because in the kingdom of God, it doesn't work like that. I can go ahead and have a mask or a facade that I'm doing it because I want to be nice. But if my heart is not changed, the fact that I share whatever I share, it doesn't mean anything really.
Yeah, that's the transformative power of Jesus in us. That's awesome. Absolutely beautifully put. How about you, Garrett?
Well, my final call to action would be, as a Christian, make sure you always stand up for what's right, and watch out for groups. And, there are several prominent socialist groups here, just here in America. They use very appealing names, just one of them that we know of, Black Lives Matter. They are an open Marxist organization. I can promise you they probably wouldn't be if they would go read the letter that Karl Marx wrote to Friedrich Engels on July 30th, 1862. But their name is clever. So if you oppose them as an organization, if you oppose Black Lives Matter, the organization, then you must think Black lives don't matter. And nothing could be further from the truth. One of the best, I call it the anti-BLM, one of the best groups out there. And they have chapters all over the country, and you never hear about them because they're a conservative group. They're a conservative Christian group, rather, is Blexit. And Blexit is an exit from the progressive movement. They are made up of phenomenal individuals, and my goal is hopefully next month to actually have one of them on a roundtable session. So that would be my call to action, is stand up for what's right regardless, and always keep an eye out. Just because an organization sounds like it's a good one doesn't mean it actually is.
Mm-hmm. That's really, really key. I'll chime in on that too. I know some people in Blexit. They're fantastic people, truly. And they're doing really, really nitty-gritty groundwork that is setting a foundation for success, and I really appreciate them. Two others I'll put in here, plug in, is Prager University, as well as the Falkirk Center. Two fantastic organizations that have a really solid basis, both of morality and that of just general, if you just want information, it's easy to absorb, it's quick, and it equips you rather with information to go out into the world from a Christian perspective, and that even understanding society right in our present day, to go and speak the truth with hope and with love and light. So thank you all so much for joining me. I love this conversation. I loved hearing from each one of you, especially because we come from such different spheres and we have different experiences and backgrounds. So thank you all for joining me, and for joining all of us watching today. Thank you for joining us. We will see you very, very soon.